In the misty port town of Alderbridge, nestled between the briny ocean air and hills lined with pine, stood a squat, aging warehouse with faded lettering, Alderbridge Transport Company. To passers-by, it was just another logistics depot. But to Lena Halberg, it was a monument to a legacy she had given everything to build, and the place where she had been quietly erased. Lena grew up in that warehouse. As a child, she'd sit on overturned crates with her homework while her father, Martin Halberg, barked instructions into his radio. The company had been founded by her grandfather, a retired shipman who, after the war, scraped together enough for a single delivery van. Martin expanded it, built relationships with fishermen, farmers, and small merchants across the coast. But Lena? She transformed it. Her older brother, Casey, was always the favorite. Charming, adventurous, magnetic. People called him a natural leader. At family dinners, Martin would say, "Casey's got the Halberg spark," while patting his shoulder. Lena was the planner. The quiet one. The fixer. In high school, she taught herself routing algorithms and studied predictive modeling. At university, she earned dual degrees in logistics management and computer systems. Her vision was clear: she wanted to modernize Alderbridge Transport, not just manage it. When she returned home after graduation, the company was functional but outdated. Trucks still logged deliveries with clipboards. Shipments were planned using intuition and guesswork. Lena didn't fight to take the wheel. She asked only for a desk in the back room, and permission to experiment. Her ideas began with small changes. A test project using GPS-based fleet tracking saved the company thousands. An overhaul of delivery routing reduced fuel costs by 20%. Over 5 years, Lena digitized the entire operation, quietly leading Alderbridge into the digital era. New contracts came in. Regional coverage expanded. Revenue soared. But success didn't shift perception. Despite Lena's innovations, she was still seen as the back-office analyst. Meanwhile, Casey, who had left the company to pursue an adventure travel startup, returned after his venture failed. With little discussion, Martin gave him a corner office, the title Director of Business Growth, and a hero's welcome. Lena bit her tongue. She wanted to believe Casey had changed. That his ego wouldn't steamroll the work she'd built. But the truth came quick. Casey began pitching ideas she'd already implemented. He claimed credit for new contracts she had closed. In meetings, he interrupted her, often turning her thorough proposals into flashy, half-baked pitches that Martin applauded. Still, she stayed silent, thinking her results would eventually speak loud enough. They never did. It was Martin's 65th birthday, a quiet gathering at the family's favorite harbor bistro. Red leather booths, sea salt in the air, and the same accordion player who had serenaded them since childhood. After dessert, Martin clinked his glass and stood. "I've seen this company weather tides and storms," he said, beaming. "It's time for the next generation to carry the helm. And there's no one better suited than my son, Casey." Lena felt the room turn to fog. The words echoed, slow and surreal. Martin continued, not once acknowledging her. Then he turned to her, voice gentle, almost apologetic. "Lena, you'll remain in operations. You're reliable, dependable, but leadership, it's not your strength. You don't have the spark, sweetie." Then came the final blow: "You'll never be good enough to lead Alderbridge." The room froze. No one said a word. Lena stood. Her heart thundered, but her voice was steady. "Thanks for the clarity," she said simply. She placed her napkin on the table, nodded once, and walked out. That night, she returned to her apartment above the harbor. She didn't cry. She didn't call friends. She opened her laptop, created a folder named Second Wind, and poured herself a glass of whiskey. On the screen, the old company logo she had redesigned years ago glowed back at her, something she'd given a decade of her life to, only to be told it would never be hers. In that moment, she decided, if they wouldn't let her steer the ship she'd saved from sinking, she'd build one of her own. And this time, she would sail it her way. The early mornings in Port Clarion were always the same, seagulls crying overhead, fog hanging thick over the marina, and fishermen shouting greetings through the mist. It was in a Reddit attic above a bookstore cafe, just 2 towns over from her family's company, that Lena Halberg quietly began again. She didn't have capital. She didn't have a team. What she did have was her laptop, a decade of hands-on experience, and a reputation that she didn't fully realize was gold in the freight world. She named her company Second Wind Freight, a nod to finding strength after being cast aside. The first few weeks were nothing but coffee, code, and cold calls. She worked from a whiteboard with 3 columns: clients, features, and to-do. She partnered with Arjun Patel, a freelance software engineer she had met during a vendor system upgrade years ago. Together, they built a lean, AI-powered logistics platform that adjusted to real-time variables: weather, port delays, fuel spikes. It was everything she had wanted to bring to Alder Bridge but had been told was too complicated. Every hour she wasn't coding or designing, she was calling. Clients she had once served personally were stunned to hear from her. "Wait, Lena? You're not with Alder Bridge anymore?" "No. I've started something new." There was always a pause. Then a flicker of hope. "You were the only one who ever showed up when our deliveries were 2 days late," one said. "You remembered our seasonal surges before we even emailed," said another. Within 3 weeks, Lena had 5 small business clients verbally committed. A month later, she signed her first formal contracts, with full trust, no questions. She sold her car to fund the first few hires: dispatchers, drivers, and a part-time accountant. She negotiated late-night warehouse access from a local storage company and hired 2 truckers she'd known since her intern days. Her office above the cafe became a war room: blueprints on the walls, route plans on the window glass, and empty coffee cups everywhere. She slept 4 hours a night and worked through weekends. Her meals were vending machine sandwiches and cold brew. But she was alive. The road wasn't smooth. A supplier backed out last minute, leaving her without refrigerated trucks for a critical seafood shipment. She rented vans herself and drove them with 2 team members through the night to save the deal. A software bug caused delayed confirmations for a week, nearly losing her 2 clients. She and Arjun fixed it by sunrise. Each problem became a blueprint for future stability. By the end of the first year, Second Wind Freight had broken even. By year 2, they were profitable. Lena had grown her team to 30, acquired a second office across the bridge, and landed her first national retail partner. The industry began to notice. Not loudly, but curiously. "Who's behind Second Wind?" a trade blog asked. "She used to be with Alder Bridge," someone replied. But Lena wasn't chasing headlines. She was building roots. She treated drivers like partners. She responded personally to client emails. She made decisions based on service, not margin. And clients noticed. In year 3, she did the impossible. She won the port-wide e-commerce contract, a coveted shipping deal Alder Bridge had lost out on 3 times. It had once been Casey's big win in the making. Now, it was hers. Her father and brother heard, of course. First came a text from Casey: "Heard you're doing well. Want to catch up sometime?" Then, a call from Martin. Not to apologize. Just to see how things were going. Lena smiled quietly after each contact. Not because she missed them, but because she realized something vital: they were nervous. Her presence was no longer invisible. She was now a storm cloud on their horizon, and they didn't know how to prepare. But she wasn't seeking revenge. Not yet. She focused on scaling. She brought in a COO, held her first leadership retreat, and reinvested in her staff, offering benefits most freight companies didn't even consider. She built her own training program for drivers. And she launched PathTrack, her proprietary tracking tool that gave customers live updates in a user-friendly dashboard. Second Wind Freight wasn't just competing. It was winning. Meanwhile, back at Alder Bridge, cracks were forming. The buzzwords Casey once threw around didn't patch the inefficiencies Lena had warned about years ago. Their operating costs ballooned. Longtime clients started shifting to newer, more nimble firms, many of them Lena's. But the true turning point came in year 4. A mutual contact, someone Lena had once mentored, now worked at a logistics investment firm. He showed up at her office unannounced. "There's something you should know," he said, setting down a confidential report. Alder Bridge Transport was part of a larger acquisition bundle, controlled by Haven Bridge Capital, a conglomerate trying to offload underperforming assets. And there it was, her family's company, listed as non-essential freight entity. Lena stared at the document for a long moment. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. She just nodded and asked a single question. "Can we make a bid?" The next few weeks were a quiet storm. Legal teams. Financial due diligence. Strategy memos. Lena had been preparing for this moment without knowing it for years. One Friday morning, sitting in a glass-walled boardroom with Haven Bridge executives, she slid a black folder across the table. "We're prepared to acquire Alder Bridge Transport in full," she said. The executives exchanged glances. "Given your history, you don't anticipate complications?" "I anticipate efficiency," she said calmly. "This isn't personal. It's logistics." The room went silent. 3 weeks later, the deal closed. Lena Halberg, the daughter who was told she'd never lead, now owned the company that cast her out. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't gloat. She walked quietly through the front doors of Alder Bridge Transport headquarters on a gray Monday morning. The same glass, the same worn tile floors, the same receptionist, who stared at her, slack-jawed. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "Yes," Lena said with a soft smile. "Please let Mr. Halberg know that his new boss would like a word." The elevator to the executive floor of Alder Bridge Transport groaned the same way it had years ago. Lena stood alone, watching the numbers blink slowly, 2, 3, 4, top. She held no papers, no legal entourage. Just her and a quiet authority that didn't need fanfare. When the doors opened, a gust of sterile air welcomed her, cool, indifferent, familiar. She walked past the receptionist who was still frozen at her desk, past the hallway where she used to duck in and out of with invoices and system mock-ups. Past the room where she'd once pitched a full digitization plan that was waved off as too ambitious. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. Inside the executive conference room, they were already seated. Martin Halberg, her father, sat at the head of the table, hands folded tight. Casey lounged beside him, ankle over knee, oozing false confidence. 2 board members Lena vaguely remembered from strategy meetings sat across from them, visibly puzzled. A legal rep from Haven Bridge Capital sipped from a styrofoam cup. Martin rose first. "Lena? What's going on? Why didn't anyone inform me you were visiting?" Lena calmly placed her bag down and sat at the table's head, her rightful place now. "I'm not visiting," she replied. "We're here for a transition discussion. Face to face." Casey scoffed. "Transition? What, are you consulting now? Helping clean up operations?" He chuckled to himself, as if she'd come to offer advice like a prodigal daughter returning with a spreadsheet. "No, Casey," Lena said, meeting his eyes. "I'm your boss." The room froze. Martin paled. "What do you mean?" She reached into her bag, slid a sealed folder across the table. The Haven Bridge rep leaned forward and nodded in acknowledgement. "It's all in there. As of last Friday, Second Wind Freight officially acquired all operational assets, personnel contracts, and outstanding agreements of Alder Bridge Transport. The transfer has been cleared by regulatory review and finalized. I am now the acting CEO and majority stakeholder." Casey stood up so fast his chair screeched back. "That's not possible. You can't just waltz in here and—" "I didn't waltz," Lena interrupted, voice level. "I waited. I built. I earned." Martin sat back, stunned. He reached for the file, flipped through the first few pages in disbelief. There were the signatures. The acquisition stamps. The new board structure. "You bought us?" he whispered. "I didn't buy you, Dad," Lena said softly. "I bought the company that told me I would never be good enough to lead it." Casey paced in the background, muttering under his breath. The board members exchanged unsure glances, clearly stunned. The legal representative cleared his throat awkwardly and began gathering his things. The real show was over, and everyone in the room knew it. After a long silence, Martin finally looked up at her. His voice had lost its thunder. "So what now? You're here to dismantle us?" "Gloat?" Lena shook her head. "No. I am here to fix what you broke. I am here to lead this company the way I always wanted to, but was never allowed to." She stood. "Effective immediately, Alder Bridge Transport will begin full integration into Second Wind freight systems. Departmental reviews begin this week. Leadership changes will follow. No one is being fired today. But everything is going to change." Martin looked crushed, not just by shock, but by something deeper, a creeping awareness that his daughter had outgrown him in every way that mattered. Casey, on the other hand, couldn't take it lying down. "You think you're better than me?" he said, voice cracking. "No," Lena said, eyes steady. "I know I am. And now, so does everyone else." That afternoon, Lena met with department heads, some she'd mentored, others she hadn't spoken to in years. Reactions ranged from stunned silence to cautious hope. Her first directive was simple: no dress codes, no titles, no presentations. "Just meet me in the main warehouse at 9 a.m. the next morning." More than 100 employees, drivers, planners, dispatchers, technicians, and execs, stood on the concrete floor of the loading bay. Forklifts hummed in the background. The air smelled of diesel and old coffee. Lena climbed onto a loading pallet and addressed them. "I know this is unexpected. I know some of you are wondering what kind of leader I'll be, or if I'm just here for payback," she began. "But I'm not here to settle old scores. I am here to settle this company." She told them the truth, about the inefficiencies, the high turnover, the tech stagnation. She didn't sugarcoat the work ahead. But she also told them about the future. "We're going to build something resilient. Something fair. We will run lean but not mean. We will put people before image and data before ego." At first, the crowd was silent. Then someone clapped. Then a few more. Eventually, it turned into something steady. Earnest. After the gathering, Lena didn't return to the top floor. She stayed in the warehouse. She walked line by line, shaking hands, asking questions, taking notes. She ate lunch with the logistics team and spent the afternoon with dispatchers reviewing the route optimization software she once designed in secret. She didn't need to fire people to make change. She needed to listen. Over the following weeks, Lena made her moves. She reopened the R&D budget her father had slashed. She invited employee proposals for system upgrades. She met privately with team leads who'd been previously ignored. She revamped driver compensation, shifting focus from raw miles to on-time delivery and safety metrics. She gave them better benefits and improved routes to cut stress. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Clients who had once started looking elsewhere now called her directly. One told her, "This is the first time I've felt heard in years." Vendors she had built trust with under Second Wind started proposing joint solutions to scale Alder Bridge's reach. Industry chatter returned, only this time, her name wasn't a whisper. It was a standard. Meanwhile, Casey struggled to adjust. Reporting to Lena, he came to meetings late, offered half-baked ideas, and tried to reclaim authority he no longer had. Team members stopped deferring to him. Drivers skipped his name in chain of command issues. He tried to rally allies but found few who were still loyal. Without a pedestal to stand on, his charisma faded. And Martin? He stopped coming in entirely. He sent one email to the staff thanking them for their years of service, then disappeared from the company he had once ruled like a ship captain in stormy seas. Lena never expected a thank you. She wasn't waiting for one. She'd stopped needing approval long ago. She stood now where she had once only dreamed of standing, not to bask in victory, but to build something better. Not as a daughter. Not as a helper. But as the leader she had always been. Spring in Port Clarion arrived in cautious bursts, sunlight fighting through clouds, winds carrying both chill and promise. Lena stood at the massive glass windows of the CEO's office, formerly her father's, looking out at the truck yard below. It had been 6 months since the acquisition of Alder Bridge Transport. 6 months of hard choices, quiet wins, and relentless rebuilding. And it was working. Inside the company, there was a shift, not a tidal wave, but a slow, tectonic movement. The kind that changed landscapes permanently. The first major shift came from within. Lena's first act as CEO wasn't to fire, but to listen. She held individual meetings with every department head. Not just the managers, but the actual doers, the dispatchers, the night shift drivers, the maintenance team who kept aging trucks on the road. She asked every person the same 3 questions. What frustrates you the most about your job? What do you think we should change? What's one thing we do well that we should never stop? The answers painted a clear picture. Drivers were burned out by unrealistic schedules. The accounting team was buried under outdated software. Customer service staff were juggling responsibilities meant for double their number. And yet, they stayed. Because there was a quiet pride in working for Alder Bridge. They believed in the legacy. They just didn't believe in its leadership, until now. Lena launched an internal project she called Reroute. Every system, every process, every layer of communication was put under review. Not by consultants, but by those who lived it every day. She brought in Arjun again to help develop a modular logistics platform, smart enough to adapt in real time, yet intuitive for employees at every level to use. Within 2 months, the warehouse team reduced idle time by 35%. Dispatch errors dropped by half. But Lena knew culture was as important as code. Every Friday morning, she walked the floors. Not a symbolic CEO rounds, but genuine conversations. She asked about kids. Birthdays. Truck repairs. She remembered names. She remembered who loved peppermint tea and who hated back-to-back routes. It didn't matter that she was the boss now, people followed her not out of obligation, but out of trust. The press, which had once ignored her completely, started to take notice. A quiet buzz built around Second Wind Freight and its rescue of a legacy firm. Trade journals called it a case study in modern logistics leadership. Sustainability blogs covered Lena's green routing initiative, which was projected to cut emissions by 40% within 18 months. The phone began to ring. New contracts. Speaking invitations. Partnerships. But while the world watched the ascent, Lena was focused on something else entirely, healing. Because within the walls of Alder Bridge, there was still resistance. Not from rebels or saboteurs, but from those conditioned by years of exclusion. Women in middle management who'd never been invited to strategy meetings. Older team members who assumed she'd cut them because they lacked degrees. Interns afraid to voice ideas because they'd seen how previous ideas were discarded without a second glance. Lena made it her mission to flip the narrative. She hosted the company's first open floor week, a reverse summit where team members could pitch directly to senior leadership, no filters. One idea, an alternate packaging method from a warehouse associate, ended up saving $70,000 in materials annually. She restructured the driver incentive program to reward consistency, not just mileage. Drivers who stuck to safe, punctual patterns over time received quarterly bonuses. It wasn't just better for morale, it reduced accidents by 28%. Meanwhile, Casey drifted further into the shadows. He had accepted his demotion begrudgingly, clinging to the belief that Lena was a temporary phenomenon. That she'd stumble, burn out, or alienate the board. But every week, her influence grew. Clients requested her by name. Vendors chose to renegotiate only after speaking with her. Even internal memos from staff now began with per Lena's direction. He tried to stir tension among a few old allies, whispering that the new vision was unsustainable. That Lena was too cautious. That she didn't understand the boldness required to grow. But boldness without direction was how Casey had sunk the company in the first place. At the 6-month leadership meeting, Lena presented quarterly growth, cost reductions, client retention improvements, and 2 new large-scale shipping partners. The board, once uncertain, now nodded with reverence. Casey didn't speak a word. A week later, he submitted his resignation. No formal farewell? Someone asked. He left quietly, Lena replied. The way he arrived. Her father, Martin Halberg, had not stepped foot in the building since the day she presented the acquisition papers. Not once. He responded to emails with brief one-liners. He didn't attend the executive retreats. He didn't answer her calls. But Lena didn't need his praise. She wasn't building for validation anymore. She was building for the people who had been overlooked, for the staff who had always cared, and for the girl she once was, crammed into a back office, quietly making miracles happen without a whisper of recognition. One afternoon, while reviewing old financials from before her acquisition, Lena found something in the margins of a report she'd once submitted. In faded pencil, she had written, "If they let me try this, I could triple routing efficiency in 18 months." She smiled. They hadn't let her try. So she'd left, and done it anyway. Not out of spite. Out of truth. Because leadership wasn't about who shouted the loudest in the boardroom. It wasn't about having the right last name, or who could charm the room full of investors. It was about who showed up when the trucks were late. Who stayed after everyone had gone home to fix a broken system. Who remembered every number and name because they actually cared. Lena didn't rebuild Alder Bridge to prove her father wrong. She rebuilt it to show what was possible when you finally stopped waiting for permission and started trusting your own blueprint. And the best part? She was just getting started. The Logistics Industry Summit was held in a glittering glass convention center just outside Chicago, drawing CEOs, analysts, tech innovators, and government officials from across the country. Lena Halberg stood backstage, a modest microphone clipped to her lapel, watching the crowd fill the auditorium. A banner behind the stage read, "The Future of Freight, Leading with Purpose." She had been invited as the keynote speaker, an honor she hadn't sought, but one she accepted with quiet resolve. On paper, she was a standout success, the woman who bought the company that once dismissed her, merged it with her own startup, and turned the hybrid into one of the most innovative freight systems in the region. But Lena didn't come to talk about profits, expansion, or flashy tech. She came to talk about the long road back to the seat she was never given. When the spotlight hit her, she stepped forward calmly, her silhouette sharp against the screen behind her. "I was told I didn't have the spark," she began. "That I was dependable but not visionary. That I'd never be good enough to lead." The audience was silent, drawn in immediately. I believed them, for a time. And then I stopped waiting for their permission. She told the crowd about the backroom desk where she'd first tested her ideas. The ignored suggestions. The night she walked away from the only company she had ever known, heartbroken but burning with clarity. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. The story was bigger than her family now. She spoke of Second Wind Freight, how it started above a coffee shop with a whiteboard, how it grew not because of noise, but because of trust. Because she showed up when it was hard. Because she listened. Because she built quietly, steadily, purposefully. "We often think leadership means volume," she said. "But the loudest voice isn't always the one people follow. People follow consistency. Integrity. Vision." When she finished, the applause was thunderous, not because of grandeur, but because her truth resonated. The quiet ones in the room, the overlooked, the underestimated, they heard themselves in her words. After the speech, a woman approached Lena. She was in her late 30s, smartly dressed, a tremble in her voice. "My family's business is transitioning," she said. "They're giving it to my brother. I've done everything right. But I guess that doesn't matter. Lena looked at her and smiled gently, the memory of her own turning point rising behind her eyes like a familiar sunrise. "Then build your own," she said softly. "And when they least expect it, come back and buy theirs." Back in Port Clarion, Lena split her time between the dual engines of her empire. Second Wind Freight continued its growth independently, run by a trusted COO she had mentored from the ground up. Meanwhile, Alder Bridge Transport, now fully integrated, was thriving under her hands-on leadership. Together, they didn't compete. They complemented each other, one nimble and aggressive, the other steady and historical. A dual-brand ecosystem, both carrying her vision, both rooted in her values. She never changed the name of Alder Bridge. Some employees assumed she would, that she might stamp her identity over the company that once overlooked her. But Lena saw it differently. "I don't need to erase the name," she explained to her team. "I've already changed what it stands for." Under her leadership, the company rolled out a green logistics program, using AI-driven route optimization to cut fuel emissions and meet strict sustainability standards. A predictive supply chain model, reducing delays by 42% across 3 major distribution lanes. A people-first training initiative, focused on emotional intelligence and inclusive team dynamics. She was invited to advisory boards, asked to co-author industry white papers, and even received a request to lecture at her old university's business school. But she remained grounded. She still walked the warehouse floors every Friday. Still met with team leads in jeans and sneakers, not to impress, but to stay connected. Meanwhile, her father, Martin Halberg, never formally returned. He became a distant name on holiday cards and quarterly board updates. Their relationship was strained, not broken, but never quite mended. At Thanksgiving, they exchanged polite words across the family table. Once, between bites of turkey and murmurs of conversation, Martin leaned toward her and said, "I didn't think you had it in you. But I was wrong." Lena nodded slowly. "You weren't wrong," she replied gently. "You just never looked close enough." He looked away, swallowing whatever emotion threatened to rise. And that was their reconciliation, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Enough, for now. As for Casey, he vanished from the business world altogether. No dramatic goodbye. No letters. Just a resignation and a silence that seemed to speak louder than any speech he had ever made. Word eventually reached Lena that he'd moved south, trying his hand at real estate. She wished him no harm, but she also didn't miss him. Because leadership, as she had learned, wasn't about who stood on stage or who inherited the title. It was about who kept showing up. A year passed. Then 2. Under Lena's guidance, Alder Bridge won 3 national awards, one for sustainability, one for innovation, and one for employee satisfaction. True markers of transformation, not headlines, but benchmarks of real progress. And perhaps most fitting of all, Second Wind Freight was now quietly mentoring 3 women-led logistics startups across the Midwest, part of a program Lena had personally funded, believing that no one should have to fight the battles she did alone. In her own words, "If the door won't open, build your own entrance, and then leave it unlocked for others." One chilly morning, she received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just a few simple lines. "I watched from afar. I was wrong. You didn't just lead, you elevated everyone around you. I hope one day, you'll teach others how to do the same. Dad." She folded the letter, set it in her drawer next to the original plan she had written over a decade ago, the one no one had read at the time. A plan that had now become reality. Years later, Lena stood once more in a logistics summit hall, this time not as a speaker, but as a mentor. Young women gathered around her, asking questions, hanging on to her every word. She didn't give them slogans. She gave them truth. "You don't need permission," she told them. "You need clarity, purpose, and the courage to keep going when the world tells you to sit down." And when one woman, bright-eyed, eager, Asked her how she kept going after being told she'd never lead, Lena smiled and said, "Because I knew I already was leading. They just didn't recognize the shape of it yet." And so, the girl once relegated to spreadsheets and silence became the voice that echoed across boardrooms and port cities alike, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol of what happens when you build with purpose, lead with empathy, and never let the world define your worth. The legacy wasn't inherited. It was rewritten. Brick by brick. Word by word. And Lena Halberg had authored every chapter.